I love it. I love being here. I love New York. I love New York because this place is, in a weird way, is a home for me. When my mom left my father when I was 1 year old, my dad became, in the absence of my family, a kind of a born-again, kind of Hasidic Jew. He joined up with a group of, he married a woman from the Satmar. Do we have any Satmars here tonight? You would be excommunicated if you were. He joined up with the Satmar Hasidim. He married into the Satmar Hasidim. And I had to visit him on my summer vacations. I would fly from Oakland, California, here to New York and live the life of Tevye the milkman for 6 weeks a year. The kids in my neighborhood spoke Yiddish as a first. I didn't know Yiddish. I'm some kid from Oakland. They would greet me. I would answer back, ha 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 ha, and hope that nobody noticed I wasn't using actual language. Years went by. And I became very practiced at pretending to be a Hasidic Jew. I would say my primary goal growing up was to just look invisible in synagogue. All I wanted to look like was a man that couldn't handle the responsibility of putting that belt around the Torah. Like, I just wanted you to look at me and say, there's no way he can put a belt on a Torah. But then it was the summer of my bar mitzvah. And that's where the rubber starts to meet the road, Jewish identity-wise. I didn't know Hebrew. The kids spoke Yiddish. I didn't know Hebrew. And there was a local rabbi that took pity on me. And he went to my father and he said, listen, give him to me Wednesday afternoons. I'll teach him how to read Hebrew. And this was like, the late 80s, early 90s. At that time, you could ask for some alone time with a child and they'd be handed over, no questions asked. But he was a good man. He was a good rabbi. He sat me down, and he started to teach me Hebrew, elemental Hebrew, the alphabet, the alphabet. This was a Talmudic scholar teaching me the ABCs. This would be like Alan Turing teaching me my times tables. I sat in there waiting to get it, and I never got it. I got more and more frustrated, and with every passing week, I wasn't getting the language, and he looked at me with great sympathy. He said, do not be discouraged. Hold on. Shmuley, come in. And he called his eldest son, Shmuley, into the room. And he goes, Shmuley, say the English alphabet. And Shmuley looked up. He goes, oh, no. A, B, D, G. The rabbi slaps me on the back. He says, hey, he is stupid in English. You are stupid in Hebrew. Everybody's stupid. This was an amazingly touching move on his part. A local community leader was willing to humiliate his eldest son in order to teach me to love to learn. It's also vaguely the plot of Dangerous Minds. But now I have my own kind of connection with this stuff. And I try to give it over to my daughter. I try to give her a love for her people. We were celebrating Sukkot. Do you know Sukkot? Are you familiar with the holiday of Sukkot? It's okay. I won't hold that against you. It's not one of our bigger hits. It's more of an underground banger of a holiday. It's our harvest festival. And the way you celebrate it is you build like a hut. Like, it's called I'm sorry to make deep eye contact with you. I can tell you don't like that at all. And it's going to stop very soon. I'm going to be in conversation very soon. But for now, I'm in conversation with you. You're the moderator tonight. Do you have any questions for me? Okay, let me know. Raise your hand when you're ready. All right, Sukkot. Harvest festival. You build a hut. It's the festival of booths. They're called sukkahs, and they're cool. You put them in your front or backyard. Keep looking at me. You put them in your front or backyard, and you thatch the roof with palm fronds, and you hang fruits and vegetables from those palm fronds. Kids really like it because they feel like they're camping. I'm in there with my daughter. We're eating our meal. That's what you do. You eat your meal in there. And she's 4 years old, and we're eating a meal, and I'm trying to connect her to her people. I go, honey, this is Sukkot. I go, here's the cool part. I go, we're in here eating our little meal in the sukkah. I go, all the other Jews, all around the world, they're sitting. Oh, are you deaf? No. Oh, okay. You're Coda. Okay, so you can accept this kind of uncomfortable situation. Okay. Oh, okay, good. I would have explained why you didn't want me making eye contact without interpreting what I'm saying at the same time. Okay, I understand now. Okay, hello to the Coda family. All right, where were we? Sukkot. We're eating our meal, and I go, all the Jews around the world, they're sitting in their little sukkah, just like us. They're eating a meal in their little hut, just like us. All the Jews around the world, just like us. It's like a beautiful tapestry of our people. And she looks up at me, little 4-year-old eyes, and she goes, not poor people. I go, what the fuck did you just say? She goes, not poor people? I go, yeah, I just said they were Jews. Obviously not poor people. What's going on right now? Like, what is happening? She goes, no, Daddy, no. not pork people. Pork people. Pork people. She thinks non-Jews are called pork people. I did not teach her that shit. I told her we are Jews, we don't eat pork. She took that information, brought it back to her room, and started riffing a brand new racial slur. Like, sure, as a comedian, I was a little bit proud of her, but as a father, I was horrified. I go, no, 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 we do not call them that. We do not call them pork people. We do not call them that. They are not called pork people. Those are the police. That's what I told her. Interesting. Not everybody liked that. I felt kind of a thin blue line in the audience here. You guys, that's all of my stand-up, but how about we start this conversation? What do you think? Thank you so much for a lovely and warm welcome. I would like to introduce my moderator for the evening. He's more than a moderator. He's also a friend. I've known Hari for more than 20 years. We've done stand-up together. We've done the good parts of stand-up and the bad parts of stand-up. And he's such a thoughtful, brilliant comedian. He's got Netflix specials. He's directed unbelievable documentaries. He's one of the keenest minds in comedy, and I'm super honored to call him a friend and to have him here tonight. Put your hands together for Hari Kondabolu, everyone.
Oh, Moshe, I have not seen your stand-up in at least 12 years, 13 years.
How'd you like it?
Anyway,
Okay.
so let's, no, it was good. You did your thing. You do the thing you do.
I didn't know you were going to neg me within the first 30 seconds of this conversation.
I want you to know that I mean business.
Yeah,
We're gonna
you
get
do.
to it. You know, I've always appreciated your writing, your stand-up, and your life stories, you know, has always been fascinating to me. And getting to go through this book, reading parts of it, like being able to just take in the complexity of your identity, like you're even cooler than I thought you were, which is...
This is interesting. This is feeling straight out of like the game dating manual. You start off with a neg, but then you're like, you're actually really cool.
No, I mean, I think you're clearly very cool. I remember you booked me at a show at Lobot Gallery in Oakland, and with like the coolest people imaginable in the audience, and I bombed so hard, and that's when I realized you and I are not the same. You can play to so many more audiences, and I'm very much like, you either like my politics or you don't, get out. And so watching you perform in that setting, it's like, this dude knows how to connect with such a broad range of humanity. And going through the book, it's clear why. Because like your whole life, I mean, you break it into 6 scenes, basically 6 different scenes that you were a part of, 6 different subcultures, and how it kind of comes together to create the person you are, and how in hindsight, it feels like destiny, which is really what you describe as the only way you really believe in fate and destiny, because it led to this. Why did you choose to write this book the way you did?
I think like when I wrote my first book, Kasher and the Rye, and it was like this story of my teenage drug addiction. It was like just a sort of tragic comedy about a boy that melted down. And I got asked so many times over the years, like, well, what happened next? And I wanted to answer that question, but I knew that I didn't want to write like a traditional memoir. And I knew that somehow I wanted it to have history, to be a historical sort of time capsule of the different universes that have created who I am. But then what you're saying started to become clear to me as I was writing it. They felt very disparate. Like I think of the 6 universes that are me as these very different worlds, and I don't understand how they fit together other than like in my body and through me. And when I got to the end of it, I started to realize like the through lines of all these worlds, but also what you're talking about, that like I could not have become me without all of these different puzzle pieces creating this path that when looking back feels exactly like destiny. I mean, you were talking, and I'm not a destiny believer, but I do believe in destiny in hindsight, that when you go through a life, you look back and go, I didn't realize what felt like a pinball slap was a path. And it exactly relates to stand-up. I think about all the time, the only reason that I started stand-up and got to be your friend and got to write this book in the first place is that I was at a semester abroad and it got cut short, and I decided I'd go to New York City just on a random trip to New York because I had nowhere to go. And I ran into Chelsea Peretti, our friend, who I had stayed in touch with since high school because we grew up together. And I said, "What are you doing?" "I'm in town." And she said, I do stand-up now." I go, what does that mean? I had no context for even, I had never thought or dreamed of doing. Did you dream of doing stand-up?
Yeah, but not it was a thing I enjoyed doing, but I didn't think it was a real job.
I didn't listen to stand-up growing up. I listened to Andrew Dice Clay because my mother was deaf and I thought it was fun to play the dirty nursery rhymes in the car as she drove me to school. I thought that was awesome. But other than that, I had no connection to it. And she said, "Well, I'm going to a show tonight. Why don't you come?" And I'd been studying monologues and acting, writing long-form monologues, and I was like, maybe I'll be like a Spalding Gray type. And she took me to this show. And it was who we were talking about tonight. Patrice O'Neill and Sarah Silverman were the two performers. I'd never seen anything like it. I never felt any. It was like this electric feeling of why are they talking like this? This feels sinful. This feels wrong. And then the next night, Chelsea was performing, and she was funny. And I was like, well, that's not the demigods I saw last night. That's a human being like me. I know her. I hung out with her. And so she said, "I'll come to San Francisco." She was coming to San Francisco that summer. And I said, "I'll write 5 minutes of material by the time you get there. Take me to an open mic." She did. I did. I got on stage. I started this path that is where I met my wife. It's where and when I think about my kid, when I put her to bed at night, I'm like, without that trip to New York, we wouldn't live in this house. I wouldn't have this life. I would be like a social worker in Portland or something like that, with a different kid, or no kid, or dead of an overdose, or a religious Jew, somewhere in Brooklyn. It could have gone so many different ways, but it couldn't have gone any other way than the way that it did.
I mean, it makes so much sense to me that you would do stand-up, also considering the broad range of humanity you interacted with, knew, were parts of scenes with. Stand-up is, one of the most diverse kinds of scenes you can have. I remember when I used to do open mics in Seattle, homeless people used to do sets. I
remember that. Yeah, the problem with open mics was that anybody could sign up.
Right.
And so you would often have a guy that didn't really do comedy, but he had some thoughts.
Right.
And you just had to sit there and go, okay, we're doing this guy's thoughts for a while. And those people, I don't know, in this weird way, I know that the reason I loved stand-up was partially due to that fact. This kind of I am attracted to these small groups of people that live outside of the margins of society.
Yeah.
And I was born into two of them, Hasidic Judaism and the deaf community, and I went out seeking those communities over and over again. And when I found stand-up, I love the fact that when we started, you would have a guy who would be a blue-collar conservative comic and a guy that would be a progressive political comic, and they'd be friends and having coffee together because they go, well, yeah, I hate everything he stands for, but the guy's pretty funny.
Right. Well, there's also a certain camaraderie that comics, whenever a comic dies, even if I don't know them, I feel something because I understand that struggle that they must have been through, different degrees of that struggle, what it's like to go on stage, and even...
Which comedian would you like to die the most, though? Would you feel the least of that?
Not while we're recording,
Okay,
Moshe.
fair enough. Can you pause it quickly?
I got a list. But there's something about, even if I really hate a stand-up's perspective and what they do, if they have a tough set, I'm still feeling something for them because I know what it feels like to not have that connection. And the great thing about you starting in the Bay Area was that, and we talked about this earlier, you had a very diverse range of scenes you were playing within the larger scene. In the Bay Area, you have this incredible club, the Punchline, right? This is one of the best clubs in the country. You have that. You have all the alt shows that I would bomb at throughout the Bay Area. And that forces you to maybe think structurally, maybe a little differently. What else can I do here? You had all the tougher road shows outside, because everything is in San Francisco. Once you get past a certain place, you're going to different suburbs, you're going to different towns, harder clubs. And so all this makes up one scene. Once you leave that, it feels like there are more divides. Like in a place like New York or LA, there are divides. Are you in clubs? Are you not in clubs? And in the book, you talk about how there has historically been a divide in stand-up in terms of perspective, philosophies, that continues to this day. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think that the communities when I started stand-up were alt comedy and everybody else. That was the only place anybody was looking, and it made this the phenomenon happen where people who were not alternative comedians would come to these alt spaces in order to get seen by industry. But I think that dynamic has kind of like fallen apart. I think that the internet kind of shattered that in the way that it shattered almost everything else. And I think that now, like, everybody is their own gatekeeper. There are no gates anymore. There's just digital gates that people create on their own.
And I think some people absolutely jump on that, but I think it's also scary. Like, I find it scary, just the nature of technology and how do I keep up. I didn't sign up to post clips, you know what I mean? Like, I signed up to make art. And I feel like what I see now is this divide versus the way it used to be and the way it is now, which I suppose is constantly there. But within the scene, there's a certain fight for a certain scene purity. Like, I remember when Hannah Gadsby's special came out. There were so many comics that were upset. That's not stand-up. That doesn't count as stand-up. Because, like, what are they doing right now? This isn't a performance. There's no jokes in this. Why are people in stand-up so defensive about what it is, so protective of what it has to be?
Well, I actually think that the answer to that I give in the book is the reason that stand-ups are so defensive about their art as art.
Yeah.
And I say in the book, like, you never hear real artists saying, like, I'm an artist. It's like, yeah, Picasso, we fucking know.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, but stand-ups are always like, this is an art form, this is an art form. And I actually think it's because we spent so much of our history in unartful space. It's very difficult to be like, I am an artist, but also I do Blue Chew erectile dysfunction ads on my podcast every week.
Right.
That's, to me, that's the thing, is that we are in this sort of intersection between advertising and art, and for so long in stand-up's history, all we ever did was sell borax, you know, and every bit was interchangeable. When Abbott and Costello got famous for Who's on First, 15 other duo acts were doing the same bit, and they're like, what do you mean you're doing Who's on First? I was doing that in St. Louis this weekend. So that kind of feeling of illegitimacy, I think, permeates our entire world. And for me, what stand-up is now is super exciting, and including the stand-up that I don't love myself. I want to see every boundary pushed. That's and right. I think part of that is probably because of all the worlds that I occupied in my life. I spent my time in worlds that don't fit together, so I like comedians that don't fit together too.
Just one more piece on the stand-up part of this. You know, you talk about your own personal growth as a performer. I definitely think there's a split. I don't even know if I would call it a split, but there's definitely a camp that feels that free speech is under attack as a performer, stand-up or otherwise, and a group that thinks there needs to be a certain sensitivity and responsibility. There's the idea of, like, you have to be genuine. Do you believe what you say? Doesn't matter as long as laughter wins out. And you have had your journey. You talk about that in the stand-up chapter with regards to, like, you reference Lindy West specifically.
Well, Lindy West is a person who's a critic of, was, I think, much less so these days.
Yeah.
But was a critic of the kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, problematics inside of stand-up. And not one that I always agreed with, but one that I always read, because I always liked her take. Even when it was one that I found objectionable, I was like, she's got an angle. And
she's also funny.
She is very funny. That's true too. So she does know what she's talking about. And she did a This American. We were talking about on the way here. She did a This American Life episode where she talked about what life was like navigating the world as a fat person. Yeah. And hearing her perspective on that, I decided I think I'm done doing fat material in my act. And that is the kind of. And that's not to celebrate, oh, how cool and progressive I am. It's more to say, like, this is the kind of person I want to be, and what life has asked me to be through all of these different worlds that I've lived in, is I want to change, not because it's the popular thing to do, but because I want to be, like, genuine and honest about the changes in my life, and I want to be, I guess I want to be an artist too.
You were talking about... Well, in the chapter about AA, which, I mean, already I think is interesting that you consider that a subculture, right?
There are some cheats, I would say. Yeah, I don't know if everybody would always say Hasidic Judaism is like a classic American subculture. But man, you should have been there though. Back at CBGB's, oh, you don't know what the gathering for the new moon at CBGB's was like. But AA, I don't know. AA is a little bit in the middle. Deafness and Hasidic Judaism, I don't know. Are they subcultures? They're the worlds I was born into, and they are a culture unto themselves.
Right.
AA is kind of in the middle. It kind of occupies both things. It is a scene, but it's also almost a religious order.
When you started drinking when you were what, like 13 or so? Is that? And then you were in rehabs by, was it 15? 14, 15?
I was in my third rehab by 15.
Wow.
Yeah, I was fucking hardcore, guys. People always ask me when I say that, they go, wow, what were you doing? What kind of drugs? And I know what they want me to say. They want me to say heroin, but that's not the answer, unfortunately. It's like kid drugs, you know? It was acid every other day. 40, basically my rule was if a gangster rapper rapped about it, I would drink it, you know what I mean? So it'd be like gin and juice, 40s of malt liquor, blunts, we only smoked blunts, and it got me sent to rehab 3 times by the time I turned 15.
When you first went to AA, what was your impression of it?
Well, I had a major problem, which was my primary operating principle in my life was that I hated adults. I mean, I got sent to therapy for the first time when I was 4. And it started to ask this question like, why am I so fucked up that I need therapy? Or is it going to therapy this much, this young, making me so fucked up?
Yeah.
And by the time I was 15, there was a time in my life I was in therapy 8 times a week. 8, that's more times than they have days. I had to double up. I was in rehab 5 days a week, group therapy, family therapy, and individual therapy. I was assailed with psychological diagnoses like ADD, clinically depressed, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and on my way to becoming a first-class sociopath, which is kind of nice to do at first class.
Yeah,
like,
right.
So and all that evidence to me was that adults were my problem. It's like every adult that I knew from the Oakland Police Department, Oakland Public Schools, my mother, my therapist, my rehab counselors, all of them were adults and all of them were telling me what to do. And that was the problem. If they'd get off my fucking back and just let me steal their money, I would be fine. And then I got to AA. I went to a young people's meeting. I was 15 years old. I got to AA, and I went to the Monday night young people's meeting in Oakland, California, and I looked in the room at the young people's meeting, and it was all adults. And I go, this is a problem. These were old people. Their young people were like 25, like gross,
right.
like old and gross. And I was like, this isn't going to work. It's just more adults that will tell me what to do. And then they started to talk, and nobody really mentioned what I should do. They just mentioned what they had done, and they said that you can do it too. And so I raised my hand, and I said, I don't know how to keep doing what I'm doing. I need to stop living like this, but I can't. Because I had, prior to that, gotten to the place that a lot of alcoholics and addicts get to, which is that I had finally figured out the problem, which was the drinking and getting high. And then I knew the solution, which was to stop drinking and getting high. So I went to my drug dealer's house. I paid him for yesterday, and I bought a bag from him for today. And I said, goodbye. This is it, my friend. Farewell. I'm out. I'm out the game. And he was like, okay. So then the next day when I went to his house to buy another bag, he looked at me and he goes, what the fuck are you doing here, man? He goes, like, you said yesterday you were done forever, and now you're back again today. He goes, you've really got a problem. And my message is, if a drug dealer ever does an intervention on you, it is time to seek help. And that started my months of that.
Was he a first-time drug dealer? It's very strange to go
No,
back.
he was a good man, Ari. He was a good man. He had a heart of gold, a drug dealer with a heart of gold.
Were you lying to me yesterday when you said you weren't going to do it again?
Like he couldn't believe.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe a drug addict came back for more. I've never seen this phenomenon. Drug addicts are usually so forthright when they say they're done.
You made a decision. Yeah.
So I started this like treadmill of going to bed at night, going, I can't do this anymore. I have to stop. Waking up in the morning and starting again. Yeah. And it wasn't that I had a devil and an angel. It wasn't that the angel popped up and said, don't do it, Moshe. live life. And then the devil's like, nah, let's get fucked up. And then the angel's like, please, we've got to get out of ninth grade eventually. And then the devil's like, nah, remember getting high, it's cool. It didn't. That's what you would think. You would think I would have a wrestling match. I had no wrestling match. I woke up, I said, let's get high. I would steal money from my mother, and then I would go get high. And then I would go, how did this happen again? So I sat in that Monday night young people's meeting, and I raised my hand and I said, I need help. And then I left. I go, please help me. And then I'm like, that's a very drug addict cry for help. Like, I need help, but if you can offer it, I'll be out in the hallway waiting. And this guy followed me outside, and he put his arms around me, and he said, it's going to be okay. That's all he said. It's not even really good advice, honestly. It's like very low on the, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to be okay. Like
It's a lie you tell yourself to keep going.
That's right. Well,
We
it
all
was
have
the
them,
lie
yeah.
he told me that kept me going.
Right.
Kept me going long enough to go back in the room and start to pick my life up.
Amazing. I mean, at that point, you're like, were there relapses after that, or were you able to stay sober through that?
Well,
through AA at that point.
here was the problem. Yes, I got sober then.
Yeah.
And the problem was that was on or around December 25th, 1994. And that meant that that in 6 days' time, it was New Year's Eve. And I was going to be 6 days sober on New Year's Eve, and I got invited to a party, like a real regular party. And this is a bad position to be 6 days sober in. I mean, I'm 15 years old. I want to go to a party, but nobody invited me and my friends to parties at that point in my life, because we were the types that would come to the party, like throw a keg through your window, call your mom a bitch, and then leave, you know, like. But somehow I got invited to this party, and I knew in my bones, like, if I go to the party, I will get high. But if do I have anything else to do? Yes, I had an AA dance that was offered. AA dances are really cool. Do you guys know about them? If you don't know about them, picture like a disco with like all the energy of Saturday Night Fever, right? Like or Studio 54, right? In its heyday. Picture Coachella, but the electronic music tent after the headliner's done, and then everybody's just like in the EDM tent, like trying to squeeze one more moment of their party out of that night. Picture that, okay? You got it? It's not like that in any way. It's the opposite. Now picture like a 75-year-old Vietnam War veteran with an emphysema tank shaking his tail feather to It's Raining Men. That is more the vibe. And I went to the AA dance, and it was the worst. It fucking sucked. I found the one other young person in the room, a girl named Rose. We sat under a fluorescent light, smoked Newports all night, and at 12:01, my mommy came and picked me up and drove me home. Now, since that time, I've DJ'd at raves on New Year's. I've been able to do stand-up and been the star of the show. I've spent it on the beach in Mexico. I've had these great New Years, but in retrospect, that was the most significant New Year's of my life. That was the best New Year's ever, because it was where I chose to live.
Can you talk about or explain how you became a teenage mascot for AA, and also what led to you eventually leaving AA? It's
so funny you say mascot, because I was an actual mascot. Like, I actually worked as a mascot. I had but that's a different story. That's about my foray into sign language interpreting, which we could jump to that, but we'll get back to that. Remember that I was a mascot, okay? Do not let that vital detail disappear from your minds, okay? I became a cheerleader of AA very quickly. I became, when I stayed sober long enough to no longer be the youngest person in the room, and then I decided that it was my job to make sure that the other young people in AA were able to stay sober too. And it was a self-appointed sheriff's position, and I was a pork person, and but for AA only, and it was a prison that I created for myself, where I became this kind of like evangelist, and I became a fundamentalist in ways that Judaism never got an opportunity to come into my brain as a fundamental truth. AA was, and years later, when I started to deconstruct some of that, the whole thing fell apart on me in a way that was. This chapter was the hardest for me to write, because I was very worried about coming across as critical about AA, because it really did save my life. It really is the reason I'm alive today, and it still is very much the way that I live my life according to the principles I found there. But it's been a long time since I've been to a meeting, and part of that was because I wanted to soften, and I was so hard about AA that I went I went to this guy, my sponsor, a new sponsor who was much more of a hippie, and I said, like, teach me how to not judge people. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, I just keep telling people what to do, and it's alienating people from me. And he said, well, what would it be like if you never told anyone what to do again? And the thought sent a chill down my spine, like my skin crawled. And he said, I want you to start. I go, but people will die. The youth of Oakland will die. And he goes, ask yourself these questions. Does this need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And does it need to be said by me? And I guess the answer was no. So I started this process of biting my tongue, and it went like this. I would see an infraction, and I would be about to say something, and then I would look across the room, and my sponsor would like shake his head. No. And I go, okay, the blood of Oakland's youth is on your hands, okay? It's not my problem. I won't say anything, but this is wrong, and you know this is wrong. And then a few months would go by, and I would look at the behavior, and I wouldn't be tempted to speak, but I would go, wow, that guy's fucking up. His life is going to suck, but it's not my business. His life's going to suck. 6 months or so went by, and I looked at the behavior, and I stopped thinking that it was wrong, and I stopped wanting to say anything. And I had moved from isn't that awful to isn't that interesting, and it was like a much more comfortable place to be. But what happened when I made that transition was that I had taken a mosaic tile out of the like perfect fundamentals of AA by not believing all of it. When you're a fundamentalist, you have to believe in everything. And by not believing in all of it, all of a sudden the things started to kind of unravel on me. And then I had to reckon with what would my life be like if I wasn't in this thing. And the book talks a lot about that journey, but it was a hard one, and one that I'm grateful for.
I mean, it's incredible that you've been sober 30 years now, right?
Just about, yeah. 29 was on Christmas.
Not only is it amazing to me because
Thank
of
you.
the will.
One warm clap. Some of them don't care.
It's also amazing.
I was a mascot, for God's sake.
It's amazing to me also because you put yourself in situations where drugs are readily accessible. Like between stand-up, Burning Man, and raves, like you put yourself in places.
I have missed the ultimate perk of a life in stand-up comedy. It's so painful. I mean, the whole reason, I would say half of comedians get into it is it's a place where you have free alcohol. Yeah. And not only that, they want you to fall apart. They're like, addiction is funny. Do that. Do more of that. Yes, I've messed out on many free drinks. And when I was 15 years old, I guess I was 16 years old. I was about a year sober, and I looked up from the shattered pieces of my life to realize they weren't shattered anymore. And I thought, I gotta do something. Like I gotta find a way to have fun, and I want to be young. And I saw a flyer on a telephone pole, and for Cyberfest '95, and I go, I'm going to that. I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna go to that. And I got $20 together, and I didn't have to steal from my mother, and I bought a ticket to Cyberfest '95. I went to an NA meeting that night, and I told, this was not a young people's meeting, this was middle-aged, recovering addicts. I was like, the freedoms of this program have allowed me to go to that techno and psychedelics festival across the street. And they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? I got in the line, I was waiting in line. I remember I had a bottle of Escape. Remember the 90s? I had Escape by Calvin Klein. Do you remember that scent? And I had the bottle, and I go, oh, I better stuff this in a sock just in case I got to thwap an enemy when I get... This is I thought I was like Scarface, you know what I mean?
Why not just use quarters?
I didn't have a roll of quarters, but I did have a bottle of perfume. And if you're going to be assaulted by a teenage wannabe, it'd be nice if it smells good. Yeah. So I stuffed the sock, and I'm like, this is my potpourri scented blackjack. And I went into the party, and I walked in, and I was just molecularly reconfigured from that moment. I put the bag down with the Escape blackjack. I never saw it again. I walked into this rave, and I went from Scarface to Baryshnikov. I started pirouetting, leaping through the warehouse. I was just I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Everybody had Cat in the Hat gloves or Mickey Mouse gloves and Cat in the Hat hat, and they were all sucking on pacifiers, which I'm ashamed to say eventually I bought a pacifier.
Right.
People use pacifiers in raves because ecstasy makes you grind your teeth, and they suck on them to make sure you don't grind them into rave nubs. But I was clean and sober. I just got one because I thought it looked cool. I thought, But I had this like profound transformation. I remember this gay couple came up to me and they grabbed me on either side and picked me up in the air and they go, "You dance beautifully." And I was up in the air and I go, "Why are these motherfuckers hugging me? Don't they know what a gangster I am? Put me down, I'll show them what a gangster I am." They put me down and I grabbed both of them and shoved them towards me, kissed them both on the cheek, go, "You're beautiful too," and disappeared into the crowd. And I started this weird fucking life in the San Francisco rave scene, DJing, throwing raves, and eventually darker things too.
Yeah, about those darker things. How do you justify, because I'm trying to think of the mental gymnastics it takes to be someone who's sober who then becomes a drug dealer who sells ecstasy at raves?
That was, I would say, an awkward phase of my youth. The weirdest part is by the time I started selling ecstasy at parties, it all made sense, like at the time. I was throwing parties with this guy named Craig, who was like a weird con artist, like godfather of the rave scene, and he's like, "You're my number one man." You ever get conned? Have you ever been hustled?
Of course,
Everybody's got to kind of have one of those in a life. Like this guy goes, "You're my man. I'm gonna give you the keys to my rave empire." And I would do like 100-hour like hard labor for him, like setting up raves in San Francisco. And I was like, "Where's the money?" He'd be like, "Don't worry about that, dog." And I'd be like, "No, dog, please pay me." And he goes, "You know what? I can't pay you for the raves. We only had 2,000 people at this party. But what I can do is I'll allow you to be my employee in my other empire, and that is selling ecstasy." So I began to be, I guess, the world's first clean and sober ecstasy dealer. And that was awkward because people in AA at that point had started to go to raves, and I would see them. I would see them walk into the party, and I would recognize them. And drug dealing at raves is a very specific kind of drug dealing. It all happens like at once. It's almost like an open air market, like a sort of like a flea market, like in Marrakesh. They're like barking, you know, like, "Come here, you want this?" But it's all ecstasy. It's all E, anybody need any E? And I'd be doing that, E, anybody need any E? And then I'd see a guy that I knew from AA. I'd be like, E, Gads, good to see you, my recovery brother from the Tuesday night meeting. So that was a low point. I like a rippling laugh.
You started talking, there's a chapter about Burning Man and how basically you started going to Burning Man the first time is because you just figured it'd be like a rave in the desert. What I love about, throughout the book, but in the Burning Man part in particular, is your self-awareness about what people are going to think when you just mention Burning Man. And you said that it's worse than people think it is, but it's also much better than they assume. So can you talk about that? Like, what do you mean by it's worse than what they imagine, yet, you know, there's a whole nother level?
Well, Burning Man has this ability to have this outsized, we've got a friend. It's very scary. Burning Man has this ability to have this kind of outsized position in people's imagination where they think they understand what's so lame about it without ever having been. And I'm here to tell you what's so lame about it is way more lame than you could imagine, but what's cool about it is something that you also probably couldn't imagine. I went in '96 for the first time, and it was fucking scary, and it was dangerous, and it was out of control. People died. Buildings were set on fire. There was a drive-by shooting range. It was what people think of when they say Burning Man used to be cool, and it was fucking terrifying. And these days, it's become this, I guess, much more sanitized version of what it is, but it still has this ability, I think, to like blow my mind on these levels that are, they're so specific. I remember one night we were walking in the way out in the middle of the desert, and we saw like a single blue light, and we had nothing else to do, so we just followed the blue light. We walked for an hour towards this blue light, and it was way out. There was no party happening anywhere. There was like an 80-year-old man who had set up a tiny marionette stage, and he was doing a marionette performance for absolutely fucking nobody. He did it for me. Like, it was just for whoever happened to stumble by. Those are the kind of moments in my life that I go like, there is wonder in randomness, and there's joy here.
We got a question that I think nicely segues into what I want to talk about next. Have you ever done stand-up in American Sign Language? What is the difference between hearing and non-hearing audiences? This is both your parents are deaf, and would you call yourself coda, a child of?
I am a coda.
Yeah.
I would say, I've never done an all-deaf audience before. I would say that the difference between a deaf audience member and a hearing audience member, I don't know, the laughs sometimes come like 10 seconds later, but I would say I've never had a bad show with deaf audience members in it. There's something, like when there is an interpreter and there's a presence of deaf audience members, there's something to me that's so comforting and so familiar and so feels like home that it always makes the show electric. I think we can feel in the audience right now the absolute visceral electricity that's happening. But I can tell you my mascot story if we're talking about deafness now.
You want to do it?
Do you guys want to hear the mascot story? That's the kind of energy I've been looking for. I was working as a mascot. I was working as a waiter in a cocktail bar. I was working as a mascot. I was dressed in a bear costume on Telegraph Avenue in Bear Basics. It was a store called Bear Basics that sold UC Berkeley gear. And I had gotten my start in show business. And I was making $4.25 an hour, and I would go there straight from a rave, so I wouldn't have slept all night. I'd buy a rave breakfast, which was 22 ounces of Mountain Dew and a pack of Newports, and I would pass out flyers on Telegraph Avenue, and then every once in a while I'd take a smoke break. I'd grab the bear head, paper mache bear head off of my head, put it sort of akimbo on top of my head, and like take a smoke break, and then a little kid would walk by invariably and go like, "Why, Mommy, why is the bear smoking?" And I'd be like, "I'm Smokey the Bear, kid, now fuck off," or whatever. My mom at that time said, "Would you like to come to the Deaf Can program?" My mother was the head of a deaf education department at Laney College, a community college in Oakland, where she had put herself through night school. We were raised on SSI, and we were a very poor family, and my mom took whatever money she could and put it towards her education. She got an associate's degree, then a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree, all at night, and left us latchkey to wait for her. We were proud to do it. I went to every one of those graduations, and she finally got a job heading up this department, the Deaf Can program, and she said, "They're hiring interpreters at the Deaf Can program." I said, "I want nothing to do with that. I don't have any desire to cross-contaminate the trauma of my childhood with my employment," because the codas will know, if you are a coda, it is mandatory that your childhood will be one part childhood and like one part non-consensual sign language interpretation internship program. Like, I interpreted for everything for my mother, like all of her doctor's appointments, all of everything. And I can't tell you how many times I showed up at a doctor's appointment and they just hadn't bothered to get anybody. And it was like, if I wasn't here, my mom wouldn't be able to get treated. And so that was my childhood. And then eventually when I started getting into trouble, the meetings became about me. And so now I was the interpreter at a meeting about which I was the subject. And then you have to start doing like a real dance, like, because when you do that kind of interpreting, you can't give over like a full bullshit. You can't be like, "We think he's great. We of the Oakland Police Department called this meeting to inform you you've got one heck of a son." Because then my mom will be like, "Okay, this smells shitty. Like, I know this isn't true." But you also can't give the full picture of how bad you are, so you have to go like, "Well, we think he shows promise. He's got some problems, sure, but we do think someday he'll write a book and be a 92Y," you know, that kind of energy. So I didn't want to be an interpreter. And then she said they're paying $13.25 an hour. I was like, I'm very interested in being an interpreter. So she brought me to her work, and I had a job interview with my boss, Catherine, who was a blind and deaf woman who interviewed me through tactile sign by putting her hands on top of my hands and assessing where I was at, assessing by feel how crisp my signing was. And the fact that I was sitting in an office being interviewed by the head of the interpreting program at the Deaf Can department by a deaf-blind woman is a tale of emancipation and grabbing freedom where nobody was offering it, that starts in the 1700s in France, where a French priest walked by two deaf sisters and saw what they were doing and thought, "I think that's a language," and said to them, "Please teach me." And they taught him, and he taught them French. And he started the first school for the deaf in France, and the deaf community in France came together to create the first recognized sign system, French Sign Language. Literally at that time, they would do these traveling road shows where the students who had learned French would be assembled on a stage, and a French a French educator would ask the audience, ask them a question, and they would ask some question in French, like some sort of, French asked question, like what degree of suffering can be borne by man, or how many cremes is too many cremes for a right brie, and then the educator would sign that question that was in French Sign Language to the assembled deaf students, and they would go up to a chalkboard, write on the chalkboard the answer in perfect French, trois crèmes, or whatever the answer was. And people lost their fucking minds. They'd go, this is amazing. It was like real-time miracle shit. And that allowed that school for the deaf to start to spread its message, which got to America. And Thomas Gallaudet, this hearing guy in America, came to France, and he got to that school, and he went up to a man named Laurent Clerc, who is, there's no other way to say it, a genius, and he said, come back with me to America, and let's start a similar school system there. They came back, they sailed from France to America, and by the time they landed, Gallaudet could sign, and Clerc knew English. Like I said, he was a genius. And they started American Sign Language, and started the schools for the deaf in America. That American Sign Language traveled across from France to America, across the country, to the Bay Area, to my mother when she was 13 to go to the California School for the Deaf to finally get her native language, to me, to Catherine, the woman that was interviewing me. It was a miracle in real time that flowed through my fingers and flowed through hers, and that is where I started my journey in sign language interpreting.
I mean, that chapter in the book is... That chapter in the book about being Coda, about your parents, it's and the way, like you just talked about, how you integrated history into your personal story is incredible. I mean, you also kind of talk about it in terms of hearing people almost behaving like imperialists to people who were deaf, because it's like you had this sign language system, but there were people who had this oralist tradition. I don't even know if I'd call it a tradition, but they basically wanted deaf people to learn how to talk in a way they would understand, right?
Well, as I talk about in the book, and by the way, I'm granted the opportunity to tell this story. This is not my story. This is the story of the world that I was born into.
Yeah.
I'm a coda. And as a coda, it's an odd experience because you're born into the community and you're accepted and welcomed in the... I am a member of the deaf community, but I am also a member of the oppressor. It's like being born white in Wakanda, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
You've got the passport, but you can't wear the panther suit, you know what I mean? So to me, the experience of being in a coda in that world is an experience of straddling these two universes. And my mom was a victim of the oral tradition. My grandmother, trying to do the best that she could, didn't teach her to sign. And then she literally walked into a cobbler one day to make some shoes, and she encountered this man. And he was a deaf man, and he'd been raised in the oral schools as well. And he told her, like, he didn't speak very clearly. The oral tradition hadn't worked on him. But he was also not a member of the deaf community because he had been isolated from it. And my grandma left that cobbler's office. All the clinicians and all the diagnostic technicians and all the deaf education. She has a degree from Columbia in deaf education, my grandma did. All of the educators she encountered didn't have as big of an impact on my mother's life as that cobbler. My grandma walked out of the cobbler and said to my mom, "I'm sorry, I'm putting you in a school where they sign." And my mom, at 13, entered that school for the deaf, and in 3 months was completely fluent in American Sign Language. I mean, how can you say that wasn't her native tongue? And it became mine too.
I mean, it's some of the most beautiful, I mean, the whole book, but there's some of the most beautiful writing in that part. And I think the passion you spoke, like, that you've spoken with regarding that history and regarding your family, you feel it in that chapter. You feel that passion that you're like illustrating now.
It's passion, but there were funny things that happened too.
Oh, the stuff about your mother that you start the chapter with is...
Well, my mother's vibrator is definitely a funny topic. Well, my mom was very sexually open, and I know that it had to do with being deaf because she just didn't have time to be embarrassed. After walking through the world with that kind of judgment put upon her by hearing society, I think that she just collated sexuality and sexual openness with, I mean, she had a Hitachi magic wand that was on top. It lived on top of a set of drawers. On top. Drawers open so you can put things into them. And then next to it, there would be a bottle of Astroglide lube. Astroglide, I can't use Astroglide to this day because it reminds me of my mother. Do you understand? And by the way, do I need to mention that the Hitachi Magic Wand is the loudest vibrator available on the market, and my mother has no relationship to the concept of sound? Yeah, it was a rough fucking childhood, but there were beautiful parts to it too.
You picked out an excerpt you wanted me to read from the book, and
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we could do that. What do you guys want? You want me to sign? Or you want to hear the funniest story of my sign language interpreting? There are two ways we can go.
the comedian in me definitely thinks we should do the funnier story.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll tell the story, and then we'll see if we have time. I became eventually a sign language interpreter. My signs sharpened. My skills raised, because when you start as a coda, often your signs are very sloppy, and so they put me in a welding class, and Catherine would assess me week after week. But eventually, my register raised, my signs sharpened, and I became a full-time professional certified sign language interpreter. And then eventually came the webcam. And that, I know that suggests other things. And my mom does have a very popular OnlyFans with the Hitachi Magic Wand. But I would make phone calls for people over the internet. And this allowed for a lot more freedom in communication. When I was growing up, the way you would call if you were deaf is that you had to type messages on a computer. The message would go to an operator. The operator would call you. That's whose voice you would hear on the phone. It made for some awkward calls for me growing up. My mom would call me and be like, hello? Hello, my son. God? Is that you? But eventually I became the operator, which was wild. And it usually was pretty banal. But sometimes it was pretty interesting. I'll tell you a rule of interpreting. You are not to say, he said, when you interpret. Never, he wants to order a pizza. Always, I want to order a pizza. That's super important, because if you say the he said, it becomes this constant infantilizing reminder that the person isn't speaking themselves, that they have an interlocutor that has to be involved. That's an important rule. It's like, it's a big deal. Got it? Got it? Yeah, guys. Okay, big deal. One day, this guy calls up, and the way it would work is I'd be on a computer, and there would be a client that would call, and they would say, okay, I want to order a pizza, I want to do whatever. This guy called, I could see on his face he's pissed. He goes, call the number. I go, okay. And I press connect. Guy picks up, hearing guy picks up, he's like, New York City Police Department, whatever. It was a police department, front desk. He's like, Iowa Police, how can I help you? And I start to interpret the call. The guy starts signing. He's just like, fuck you, motherfucker, you stupid fucking pig. Suck my dick, bitch. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. And I'm like dutifully interpreting everything that he says. The cop is chill. This dude is the most professional police. He's just like, well, sir, I can see that you're agitated, but I don't exactly know why you're calling, and if you don't let me know why you're calling, I'm not going to be able to help you. He's like, you can help me by sucking my fucking dick, you stupid fucking pig. I'm loving life right now. Like I've always wanted to be able to call a cop a pig with impunity. Like I'm into it. I'm adding snorting sounds just for a little mise en scene. You know, like we're loving life. And then it's going back and forth. The cop, nothing. He's not even a little upset. He's just like, sir, I told you I'd like to help you, but you got. And then the guy finally, the deaf guy, client signs this, which is fuck your mother. And I look at him, I go, and the cop goes, what? What'd he say? What'd he say? What'd he say? I go, hold on, interpreter, just getting some clarification. I goes, what'd you say? What'd you say? He goes, fuck. I go, all right. He said, fuck your mother. He said it. He said it. I jumped out of professional composer so quickly. So did the cop, by the way. He went from this, the cop goes, fuck my mother, fuck you, motherfucker, you know where I am. Come down here, bitch. The whole thing was such chaos. Nobody even noticed that I had violated the ultimate sacred rule in interpreting, and I lived to interpret another call.
I mean,
Yeah, I think we're out of time. Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, I think. Are there any other questions or that we should answer before we go? Thank you guys so much for being here. It's an honor. And Hari, thank you for doing this.
well, I think the most important question to ask the audience is, will you buy a book now?
Yeah.
Because you
Some of
should
them.
buy a book now.
I mean, this book has been like so much of my heart and soul for the last 3 years. I poured so much of myself into it, and it is equal parts like heartfelt and comedy and history and memoir. And it is the 6 worlds that created me, and they are the 6 parts of me. And I'm honored to be able to be here, and thank the 92Y for having me, and Hari, and the interpreters, and everybody else for coming. And just want to say thank you all for coming as well. Good night.